Hi everyone, welcome to the new episode of the Prime You series of interviews with top business and technology experts. In this episode, we've got a pleasure to sit and talk with Beena Ammanath, Executive Director of Deloitte AI Institute, and discuss the global AI trends, AI initiatives at Deloitte, and Beena's latest book that is about to be published, Trustworthy AI. We also talked about the subject of female leadership development in the tech industry. It's a great interview with a wealth of valuable insights. So please don't forget to subscribe to the PrimeView YouTube channel and follow us on LinkedIn, not to miss other great interviews coming your way. Stay tuned. First of all, I want to thank you for making the time to join us today at the PrimeView. It's a great pleasure to welcome you, Beena. I want to start our conversation from the Humans for AI, right? The organization that you have started. Maybe you could tell us a little bit about that organization, because the Humans for AI, it's a bit of mismatching, right? Usually it's AI for humans. So what is your idea behind that organization?
Beena, thank you so much for having me on the show, firstly. It's a great starting point, and I'll tell you the reason why I started it. So I have studied computer science. My background, is as a technologist, but and I've always been a supporter of getting more diversity into tech, into leadership, into boards. I've always been on other nonprofit boards, and I still am on another nonprofit board that's focused on getting more girls and women into tech. But as AI started becoming real and prevalent, I realized that not having enough women and diversity in AI is going to be a huge problem, not only because the AI that we build will be biased and incomplete, but also because AI won't reach its full potential. So I'm a technology optimist. I want to, and I believe that, AI can do a lot of good for humanity, right? But for it to reach that potential, you need all humans to be part of it, right?
Yeah.
And I realized there is a very elite group that is really, designing, developing, and building AI. And when I started this, it was about 5.5, 6 years ago, right? There was not as much awareness, and it was a very selective group that was focusing on building AI, and companies were hiring data scientists. And I also realized that your AI team doesn't need just data scientists. You need the data engineers, software engineers, but you also need designers, you need testers, you need project managers, you need product managers. So the idea behind Humans for AI was really on, can we drive more AI literacy with a goal to surrounding this homogeneous group of data scientists with diversity? Can we get more female project managers, female product managers? You are underrepresented minorities who are designing and testing. So surround it with diversity instead of expecting that we need diversity just in data scientist ranks, because in the real world, a data scientist by herself can only do so much. You need all these other skill sets. So that was the idea behind Humans for AI, of driving more AI literacy and to get more diversity into AI. Now, the name itself, you're probably the first person who's asking me about it. So, the idea was that, we hear a lot about AI for good and AI for humans, which I completely believe in. But I want to create a movement where humans also see the potential I'm seeing with AI. I want all humans to be for AI, right? To be supportive of AI. And a big part of getting more diversity and driving literacy is also just raising the awareness. Because I'll tell you, my mom, she has no idea what I'm talking about when I speak AI, when I tell her what I do, right? When I start talking about the work that I do. And I want everybody to understand, when they read a news article about AI, I want them to at least have a basic understanding about what machine learning means, what is deep learning, what is facial recognition, right? Just in simple, plain English. So we need more humans who are for AI, and for that, they need to understand basic AI concepts.
That's a great explanation. And that's a very noble goal that you have, and bringing more girls, more women to AI, to that, domain that is thriving right now, right? So many companies are focusing on AI. So maybe you could tell us also, so you've been working on that project, right? You mentioned like over 5 years. So what is the success there, right? So what your organization has been able to, to deliver, if I can put that that way.
Yes. We do a lot of events and meetups to raise awareness, but I think one of the key areas we're focusing on is, to truly reach the humans who would, in normal circumstances, not have access to AI, or nobody talks to them about AI. So one of the big programs that we've launched is really, partnering with universities and being able to deliver AI fluency training. And I'll speak specifically about a very successful one we've had at UC Berkeley, which was where it was delivered by Berkeley professors and sponsored by Berkeley alumni. So it was all by this one university. And what Humans for AI were, our role was to really bring the people who would benefit from just getting basic AI literacy training. And it was a 1 week training session. And at the end of it, my goal, in the simplest word, was when they read a news article about AI or facial recognition or NLP, they know in their head what that means, right? So, and the biggest, success for me was we got people from neighborhoods by partnering with other nonprofits who are serving URMs. But we specifically also partnered with one organization called Love Never Fails. And that group rescues human trafficking victims and gets them through high school. Right. So we got a cohort, about 10 individuals from that organization. And, at the end of the week, they were so grateful and so thankful. They're like, nobody talks to us about AI. We just read about it, we hear about it, and they've already been through so much in life, right? It was one of those where, Dana, I was so touched, right? That impact that we had, even speaking about this right now gives me goosebumps, because there are so many humans who get left behind. It's easy for us to be in our technology bubble and focus very much on business value creation and ethics and all these things, but there are humans who are just being left behind. So how do we help them, just as part of the conversation, just help them understand the basics of it, right? So for me, that was a big success. And we are reaching out and working with other universities to do similar programs. But that's one story.
You're doing a great job. Yeah. Amazing. Yeah. This, I've never heard about this, this kind of program for, as you said, for people who are left behind, right? That have gone through very difficult circumstances like human trafficking in modern times, right? It's awful, right? So yeah, making like presenting this technology, sparking that interest, right?
Yeah.
So maybe life-changing as well for them. So that is very cool what you're doing.
Yeah. And Beena, can I just add one thing is that,
sure.
And our goal is not to, reach out to directly, but there are so many organizations doing great work, right? Working with these victims or working with, people who don't have access. So we partner with those nonprofits, and then we partner with universities. So kind of the connection point, not trying to recreate anything.
I got this. Okay, great. So you started, so it's very interesting that you teach others about AI. It would be also interesting to hear, so how that happened, that you actually got this interest in the technology. This technology is relatively new, right? So yes. What was that igniting point for you, Beena?
Oh, it was a long time ago during my undergrad era. And that time, so I studied computer science and, AI was one of the subjects we had. But at that time, I'm totally dating myself here. At that time, it was all theory, right? We couldn't really do much beyond, our imagination. And there was some basic programming, Lisp and stuff that we could do, but not at the scale that we and things we can do. So I've always been, fascinated by AI. There was not much I could do for the first 20 years of my career. And the good thing is, I stayed in the data space. I have worked in a number of industries, but it's always been tied to data. And for me, I think it's a natural evolution. Like when I started, it was more SQL Server, and I was using database development and DBA kind of work, moving on to that next era of business intelligence and data warehousing, when we started using more data to drive reporting. And then when Hadoop and big data came into the picture, AI started becoming real. So it was more like, oh, now all the theory that I studied, a while ago is actually becoming real in the real world and driving business value. For me, as a technologist, I've been part of the journey, but AI, so I'm very fortunate to actually be alive during this time where something I studied in theory and couldn't really try out. Now I get to do it in the real world. So I'm very fortunate.
Yeah, absolutely. And you're working in a very interesting, domain, AI ethics and trust. And I believe
Yeah.
many would have, interest. What is it, right? So we know the value that AI provides to many industries, enterprises. So maybe you could elaborate a little bit more on the ethics part.
Yes, yes. And, so like any technologist, I get very enamored by all the value and positive things that technology can bring, right?
Yeah.
So I know that AI can bring a lot of value to humanity as a whole. But as I started down this journey, I realized that there is also, negative impacts that it can bring. Ethics is a big part of it, but just around compliance and governance and regulation, I think of it as that negative impact bucket which is where ethics falls. And data, maybe to simplify it even further, this is how I think about it. Right, we are in that phase with AI, where we were with say when motor cars were being developed, right, when the car engine was being developed, right? We are, the first stream is really around where AI research is still happening. We're still, building out the next deep learning or GPT, right?
Exactly.
That core research that's happening. And in parallel, we are using that same technology in real world to solve real world problems because we can see value, right? So while the
Right.
engine is still being developed, we're able to put a wrapper around it and drive from point A to point B. So that's the second stream of value creation. And then there is a third stream, right? Which is where we don't really have the speed limits set for how fast a car should be driven. We don't know how much carbon is, how much pollution will be, raised because of driving that car. We don't know what happens when two cars hit each other. There are no seat belts. So that's the third stream where I think, ethics is a big component. Because we are, while the technology is still being developed, we are using it in the real world. We've not fully figured out all the impacts of that technology. And that's the interesting and challenging part for us, for our generation, to now figure out, yes, there is value you can get from this technology, but what are the speed limits we should set? What are the, how do we define the lanes?
I love
So
the analogy. Yes, that's it's so clear, right? With this analogy with cars and with the rules, right? That we are still not aware of, and we should be able to, probably, I believe that these rules, like in driving, they've been, like written with sort of like with blood, right? Because you were testing and you realize so this is something that probably is happening with AI, and yeah.
yeah, as you can probably tell, I'm a history buff. So, like when the first cars came out, there was, it was being driven on dirt roads. There were no seat belts. History can teach us a lot. And yes, we need to be aware and we need to figure it out. But my bet is on humanity, and that we will figure it out. We will see, those seat belts coming into play, whether it's through regulations or governance. There is going to be, more changes happening in that third stream where we've not focused on as much till now.
Yeah, that's a powerful explanation. It's a great one. Yeah, and I know that you are your book, Trustworthy AI, right, is
Yeah.
about to be published. So maybe you could tell us more about, so who is this book for, and what kind of problems you are going to like, what are you talking about there in that book? So
Yeah, happy to. And it's really, tapping into my experiences with working, being in the field with, across a number of industries, right? Where I've actually built AI teams and AI solutions and put it out into the market or used it within the organization to drive value. And what I've realized is what has happened in the past few years is, of course, there's a lot of awareness and there's a lot of headlines that come up about ethics, and it's more in the context of bias or fairness or transparency. And as a technology optimist, I worry that the impression is that it's all doom and gloom, and I don't think so. I think there are real use cases where you don't need to worry about bias, but you do need to worry about other things that fall in that third lane, so to speak, the negative risk, right? So if you are using AI to automate, say, an expense reporting system, or automatically categorizing documents, right? I think the ethics implications are going to be different, right? When you are, or something as touchy as facial recognition, using it for in a law enforcement scenario, it's terrible if it's not fully fully unbiased. But if you're using it for safety in a factory floor, then it's up to the organization to weigh in and see what is important. So my book is really a synthesis of all the experiences that I bring, and that really defining that third lane, which is about how do you think about trust and ethics from a business perspective. It's not about trust and ethics from a personal perspective. It is not for that audience. It is really for anybody, either building AI or using AI in an enterprise, in a business. How should they think about it? What are the different dimensions they should consider? What are the questions they should ask? Who are the stakeholders they need to talk to? What kind of expertise do they need? And how do you solve for it in the context of their organization? So it is very much defined, it is about the different dimensions of trust and ethics from a business perspective.
Very interesting. And you touched on that many might have this misunderstanding of ethics from the personal perspective, as we understand, right? Ethical behavior, right?
Yes.
So if you take this, let's say, industry logistics, right? Many would, be lost how to apply trustworthiness and ethics to that. Maybe you could provide us understanding of how this right notion is applied to any industry.
Yes. And I'll just go back to my earlier car example. There's also a feeling that we need a one rule for for a technology like facial recognition, or we need one rule for predictive analytics. And I don't think it's a one size fits all. I think it's going to be just like, think about speed limits, very different than where I am and you are, and very different in Germany, for example, right? The regulations, the rules are going to be different based on that, the context and culture. And for that, so if you start with the mindset that every organization might have their own, while the regulations are being developed, have their own best practices that they put into place, and that, but then it's a good starting point to start reading the book and then figure out what does AI ethics mean for my business, for my organization, and how do I make it real? So it's really about having that conversation right from the board member to the C-suite to every employee within the organization. The first recommended step is, provide a foundational AI fluency training for every employee and your board members and the C-suite, so that everybody understands at a base level what does AI mean for our organization and how we're using it. Because it's not just your data science team that's going to be using AI or building AI. It's also that accountant in your finance department who might be evaluating an AI vendor for, automating a part of his job, right? So every employee should be trained about AI. That's, ground stakes. And then bringing in key stakeholders and thinking about the different scenarios where AI is being used and making an explicit decision on what we want to do in which case. For example, if you are building a platform that has human data, that uses human data to do personalized marketing, it's different dimensions. If you are a factory and are using AI to predict a factory floor machine failure, the ethical implications are different and bias may not be one of the dimensions. So figuring out what are the dimensions that's crucial to you and making an informed decision. So if you are looking at building an AI tool for personalized marketing, you absolutely have to talk about bias. You absolutely have to talk about transparency and fairness and what parameters are important. And you also have to talk about safety, human safety, and how do you make sure that you're not leaving anybody behind? How do you make sure your AI solution is not going to drive more inequity? So that's a decision that the group of stakeholders need to make together. Just like when you go and join an organization, you agree to the principles, at a high level, the integrity principles. Every job I've been at, there are principles that the organization adheres to. So you need to have AI ethics principles at the organization level. And once you so you define what dimensions are important and what are the ones that we are going to make a informed decision on. You also decide when AI goes wrong, who is actually accountable for it. Is it the data scientist who built it? Is it the CIO? Is it the head of data science? Is it the CEO? Because that when you take that level of accountability and actually document it, people are more engaged, because if your name is on something, because at the end of the day, when you think about business, if you are responsible for the actions of your employees, right? And if AI is making a decision on your company's behalf, somebody within the organization has to be accountable for it. Is it going to be the CEO? Is it going to the data scientist? And we've seen cases of this already. So, having that conversation and documenting it, right? That's crucial. So, my book actually goes through different scenarios, the questions you should ask, how do you facilitate that conversation? And then, going into the people side, making a decision on, do we need a chief AI ethics officer, or where does, every employee needs to be informed, but who is really, responsible for making sure that is happening? Right. So making sure that you have the right roles in place who have the right power to actually drive change. And then looking at, your existing technologies, AI tools you might be using, or AI that you purchase from a vendor, are they in agreement with the principles that you've defined? Or, are they not really looking at it from a fairness perspective, for fairness, for example, from the same perspective as you are, right? Is there a disconnect there? Because those tools are being used by your business. And if you're building AI, then, actually injecting into your project process, right? No matter which project management process you follow, there is a very early crucial step is defining the ROI. What's the revenue impact I'm going to have by doing this project, right? That's how businesses operate. What's the value I'm going to get from it? I would say you have to, as part of that process, you have to spend at least 10% of time to think about the ROI, but spend 10% of the time thinking about what are the ways this could go wrong. What are the ethical risks? What is a brand reputational risk? Who is accountable if it goes wrong? Have that discussion 10%, which is on that third lane of making sure that you're taking care of all the risks. And Dana, the reality is you at that point in time, you will know what you know based on the people at the table, and it is okay. It's probably not going to be as fully complete or comprehensive, but at least you've put that thought behind it and you've captured it, and you'll have some guardrails in place, as opposed to having no guardrails, putting it out there, and then realizing, oh no, my chatbot is going rogue, right? So I think we just need to change that fundamentally, the process a little bit, to make sure you're thinking about ethics early on as part of the design. So that's at a high level, that's a process to actually operationalize it and make it real in the business.
Got that. Those are great points, and I got, a few questions, like follow-up questions on that. So when you say, we talk about somebody wants to build AI project, right? They have good intentions. Nobody wants to build a biased, unethical projects, right? Because it's, as you said, it can have impact on your reputation, on your ROI, and other things. But the thing is that by building AI project, you need data. And there might be, it's not that you've injected that corrupted data, but maybe data is missing, right?
Yes.
So how can company be accountable of something that is missing, that is not there, or you've been unaware of? So what are the scenarios there?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. And, I think the first step is to even realize that the data is missing or the data is biased, right? I don't think it happens automatically, right? It's more of a discovery late post project release. And what I'm trying to say is the first step is to make sure that your data is complete, and to be aware that the data that you have is incomplete or is biased, and then bring in the brightest minds who are building that solution to figure out how do we augment this data, whether it is with synthetic data or you generate the data, or you buy the data to fill it. The first step is awareness, and then the second step is the bright minds that's building the solution. Let's figure out, we have a gap in this data. What does that mean? Again, it's not a one size fits all. So that's why having the team that's building the AI, they need to be, have a seat at the table to be able to say, firstly, we need the stakeholders to be able to ask the question, do we have complete data? Are there, data parts of it missing? Do we know of any biases within the data? And the next question is, do we need to address it, right? Is how crucial is it to have completely unbiased data? And if it's crucial, then you need to figure out, how do we fix it? And the biggest decision you need to make is, if you cannot fix it, do we still go ahead with building the solution or not? And that doesn't happen today. That very mindful, thoughtful conversation is all that I'm requesting that every business should do, and make an informed decision, as opposed to discovering later on, oh, we had gaps in data. Let's have the conversation and let's say, yes, we know we have missing data and here are the risks, but as an organization, as a business, we are still moving ahead with the AI solution because we still see value in here.
Got this. Yeah, that's a great point. Yeah, I got this. Yeah, totally. And one thing you said, that organization might be aware that they have missing data and or biased data, but they can still make the decision to move ahead, right? So from your perspective, so there are different industries, and when we talk about healthcare, probably this bias, right, would have bigger impact. But when we talk about logistics, some might think that this topic is not, like, bias might not be that applicable, right? So
yeah, and even if you think of just hospitals, healthcare, very specifically hospitals, if it is data that is influencing patient care, right, then bias might be something that you just cannot tolerate in the data. And I'll come back to that one, hold on to that. But it might be something you decide, no, we cannot deal with biased data. But if you are using an AI solution which is predicting when the X-ray machine or MRI machine might fail so that you can call in a field service engineer, if it is equipment, you might say, yeah, it's fine as long as it's, predicting at 96% accuracy rate. If it's not trained on all possible X-ray machine devices, we're still okay, right? And you can go ahead with it. Now, coming back again, that's a business decision. That's not a decision that should be made by one individual or by the data scientist or by the CIO. I think it's a business decision. That's why you need those guiding principles, right? Now, coming back to bias data in patient care, right? Again, the reason I say it is a business decision, because say you have biased data and it is about patient care, and it is about detecting an illness, and you see that the AI solution that that you're using can predict an illness earlier for 95% of the population, but it's not fully trained on all possible scenarios and all possible conditions, right? So the data is biased, it has gaps. But if that AI is still saving and providing 95% higher safety compared to a human, it's your business decision. Do you want to go with that, or do you want to wait till it is completely unbiased? Right? So it's a business decision. It's not one individual's decision. And it's not about, all biased data is bad. It depends on the context. And then it also depends on what decision the business makes.
Yes, and it also, reminds me of tech debt, right? So companies can run certain, like AI projects, knowing that it doesn't have all the data necessary there, right? But working on training the algorithms on the way, right? That can happen, like with the example that you provided about the disease discovery and other things in healthcare. Great. Yeah. So maybe also I could see it in Deloitte offers Trustworthy AI framework. What is it about? So it's it sounds very similar to the book the title of the book that you have written, right? So what is the framework about?
Yes, absolutely. So it is Trustworthy AI framework is really a framework of how do you think about trust and ethics in AI, and how do you operationalize it? And we go, we provide those services to all our clients. So every client who is on an AI journey and is thinking about how do they get their arms around ethics, because there is so much noise in the market about it. So it is very much focused by industry as a solution that is provided by Deloitte to companies across the globe.
Got this. Okay, interesting. So maybe you could provide some examples, right, of your work with companies and how if the steps look like, right? So company working in certain industry decide that they want to have AI projects. So what would be your role in that process?
Yeah, absolutely. And there are, I think at a high level, there are two scenarios. One is, companies that are well ahead in their AI journey and have a number of AI solutions or use a number of AI tools. So it is, where many companies are, and it is really about, now you want to think about the ethical risks, want to make sure that whatever AI you're using or building is trustworthy. So that is really about, the step about defining the ethics principles is absolutely crucial, and we bring in key stakeholders from across the organization to help them figure out what ethics means for their organization. And then we evaluate existing assets or tools or products and make sure that, where do they fall on each of those principles, where do they rank, and provide recommendations on how to fix it, right? So so that's the first scenario. And then the second one is where the companies that are very early in their AI journey, right? They have a few POCs and they have a few in production, but very early. And they are more in the phase of, it is how do we put guardrails in place early on so that you can innovate faster, right? So it is not so much on the assessment, but still about defining AI ethics principles, what's important, and making sure the processes are set up to actually help their teams run faster and build AI faster, deploy AI faster. And Dana, I've seen, both the scenarios where, a CIO came and said, help us set the guardrail so that my team can innovate faster, right? And they were early in their AI journey, and the ones that later is really about the assessment and helping them, change their processes, do the assessment, and raise the awareness among employees across the board.
Yeah, that's very interesting. And from your perspective, what companies are less resistant to implementing, the right processes? And
I think it's like you rightfully said, it's easier when you don't have too much already, right? Because then it doesn't mean you need to go back and look at everything. It's wiser to do it early on, but obviously the ethical risk, that third lane is just being defined, right? And it doesn't help that we don't necessarily have all the regulations in place. So we know that regulations are going to come across the board. So, getting prepared. So I think, both of them, it's need to do it. Both scenarios need to do it. And honestly, even the starters, the ones who are early in their journey, are rapidly catching up, right? So I think the category of starters is very fast moving into the ones where there are a lot of tools, AI tools and products.
I got this. So from your perspective, so there are many companies and there is a lot of buzz about AI, right? As you said, about headlines. But why do you think still there are so many companies across industries that overlook, right, the problem of AI, biased AI, and what can be done to improve that situation?
Yeah. And that was actually one of the big reasons I wanted to put this book out there, because of my diversity of experience. I really wanted to, it's easy to shrug your shoulders and say, oh, we don't really work with human data, so we don't have to worry about bias or fairness, right? But no, there are still ethical implications. You still need to, think about trust in your AI solutions. So that was one reason to really say that every company who's building AI should be thinking about ethics early on. And then the second is, I think because of all the headlines and the news, there's a feeling that it's not easy to think structurally about ethics, right? There is no solution for it. There is nothing we can do, So there is that almost that feeling that there is not much that can be done to mitigate bias or to make sure that our algorithms are fair. I think there's a lot that can still be done. Yeah, we don't have all the solutions, but I think having that first step of awareness and bringing your stakeholders together is a huge monumental step to get started. So I think it's a combination of both, not enough clarity and not really knowing what to do about, the problem itself.
Yeah, that's a great point, when you say starting from awareness, right? And bringing all the stakeholders and discuss the potential risk. Yeah, that's my next question is about the challenges, right? That you work with so many companies and across industries. As you said, you have this great experience of working across many industries. And maybe you could tell us about the challenges for being innovator, right? Moving forward with AI and other things in a larger organization comparing to smaller one.
Yeah, I think I like to classify it into the companies that existed before 30 years ago and the companies that came in the digital era, right?
Yeah.
The last 30 years, right? So the digital native company versus the non-digital native company, where a lot of the data still sits on papers and is handwritten and it's in ledgers and physical books, right? So when that's it at a high level, right? So when you're a digital native company, there is very easy access to data. It is much easier to get started on your AI journey, whereas when you're a non-digital native and you've been around for 100 plus years, there is a lot of work that needs to be done from a pure data engineering, data management perspective that needs, the foundational work before you embark on the AI journey. But I also believe, Dana, that our biggest opportunities lie in those core industries like agriculture, education, manufacturing. And I think that's a huge opportunity for us to look at as we think about AI. It's obviously easier as a digital native company. And also if the other challenge is also if it's a data native company. What I mean by that, like companies primarily from life science and healthcare, pharma, financial organizations, they've all been data rich just because there's been so much regulations and compliance around these two industries, right? But if you look at agricultural company, capturing data is not in the DNA, or manufacturing, capturing data for later insights is not in the DNA. So changing that mindset to be able to capture data when you are building an equipment, making sure you have the right sensors in place so that you can get the data and then build predictive analytics on top of it to predict that failure. That's a different mindset compared to in a financial services company where it's always been data rich. So that's the difference I've seen in my own personal experience. There are nuances. It's not, again, with AI, that the difference you see that companies that are ahead versus the companies that are slower is really because they are not digitally native or data rich, as is not there in their DNA.
Got this. You touched a little bit on education. Maybe you could tell us, this, many believe that this industry is falling behind in innovation, right? So maybe you could tell how this industry could leverage AI technology or tech, right, in general, to innovate faster at a faster pace.
Yeah, education is an area that I'm personally very passionate about. And, as you know, Humans for AI is also, all about education, right?
Yeah, right.
But look, the reality is, I think since the education was invented, it's always been one to many, one teacher, multiple students, right? We all have been through that system. And it's also been a one size fits all. But if you look at it, there are humans learn differently. And I have two kids, and I know they learn differently. One is very structured. He reads from a book and he gets it. The other one is more hands-on and he needs more visuals, right? So the way they learn is very different. And the power of technology, the power of AI is to really be able to identify it and provide that level of personalized training and really empower our teachers to be able to provide that level of personalized training. Can technology take that personalization part, and the teachers are more of that human and providing the human skill sets that the students need? So I do feel there's a lot that can be done in the education space. I also believe that AI can help take education to the farthest corners of the world, where traditionally we've not been able to take physical classrooms. AI can be that technology which provides a highly personalized level of training and education to whoever needs it across the world. And we're seeing some movements in that space. I do think just providing education will unlock so much more potential, so many more solutions. And for me, I think education is one of those areas where we really need to focus on, and we've all lived through it. So, if we can make it accessible to all, make it personalized, but without getting creepy and without invading privacy, that's a balance you need to hit, right? You don't want to, do any kind of violations in order to make it personalized. So doing it very mindfully, I think there is a huge opportunity with education.
That's a great point. And I can totally relate to that. You mentioned your kids, that they how differently they learn. Also, I've got actually 9-year-old twins, and they learn totally different. Just like you said, one is really structured, catches right away. Another one needs visuals, maybe drawing a little bit. Yeah, so we learn differently. And with the help of AI and technology, we could actually provide that personalized learning, the experience. That's a great, you beautifully actually put that together. Great. Beena, one of the questions, you are a great aspiration and inspiration to many women in technology.
Yeah.
And, many would want to know you've got this great journey in tech. So maybe you could distill some of the lessons from your career and for women that are building their career in tech or already there, right? So what would be those lessons that you could share?
I think there is a lot more awareness now. There's a lot more support. So I think, having, being able to tap into the resources that exist for you, being aware of the resources that your organization provides or that, the community around you provides. I think it's very important to tap into the resources that exist. I've certainly seen a huge shift since I started my career to now, right? 25, 30 years ago, there was nobody talking about the lack of women in technology. It was just accepted and you dealt with it. But now, there's a lot out there. And I think, if you don't take advantage of it, it's not really helpful to you because there are others who will take advantage of it. There are organizations, nonprofits that exist that put very specific events or provide networking opportunities. So taking advantage of the resources that exist is the number one thing I would advise. And the second one is, really being able to identify your strengths and focus on that. I think there's again, going back to education and how we are traditionally brought up is, it's all about, improving on our weaknesses, right? And I think we have to change it to building on our strengths. So if you are really good at something, be proud of it and showcase it, and don't try to fit the mold because you never will, and it's an uphill battle. So identify your strengths, know yourself well, become your own fan, be your own champion. It took me a long time to find my voice, but I think really getting knowing your strengths and being accepting of it is a good step forward. The third one I would say is have your own board of directors, whether you call it a network or whether you call it your circle. But, as a career woman, it is very important to think about the different aspects of your life. And in career, I also include parenting and, family stuff and cooking and whatever your interest might be, because that's what makes, you have to think about your whole life, right? I don't think of work as separate. It is part of life. And so having a board of directors who can guide you, mentor you on these different aspects of life. So I have a board of directors. There is somebody who I talk to if it's about, AI, there is somebody who I talk to who is a more, he's a really great leader. And my board of directors is both men and women. And it's really about, the person whom I admire the most and the expert, an expert in that area, and being able to tap. So, building that board of directors or a network who you can lean into for different aspects of your life. I think that is, you don't have to do this alone. There are a lot of people out there, and 99.99% of people want to help. Or most leaders want to help. So if you reach out, you will get the help. And if not them, then there is somebody else. So I think, just definitely, build out your board of directors, tap into the resources that exist. That would be my number one advice.
That's a very powerful one, and very actionable. So, Beena, thank you so much for sharing that. I believe many women will find that, inspirational, right, in building their career. Beena, I want to thank you so much for your time and for sharing the valuable insights with the PrimeU audience. It's been a wonderful and great pleasure to have you on the show.
Beena, thank you so much for having me on your show, and thank you to your audience for listening to this episode.